Today, it's all going to be on justice and justice and justice. Our third arm of our justice conversation today is on people who have died, people whose bodies have then ended up in mortuaries, but those bodies have not been claimed by loved ones, or so we are told. And so, because the law says this, at some point, those bodies have got to be disposed of by the government. The question is, but how can you be alive, live through several years, you're in this country, you end up dead and nobody knows who you are?
Oh, nobody's looking for you.
And nobody's looking for you. Up to a point where you actually now are just going to be married in an unmarked grave.
How?
How does it happen?
Why are we saying that all your relatives died, so there's no one to claim you?
Again,
how is that possible?
How is that possible? It's even neighbors would know this person. We haven't seen them for a while, and the investigating agencies would be saying, all right, so maybe this person described them, this is how they look like. That matches with the body that is on our records, that was found in such and such a place. I mean, really, that's why we've brought in a forensic specialist to have this conversation with us. Dr. Myrna Kalsi is our guest. Good morning, Dr. Haring.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Karibu. We are going to talk about that. I mean, what the law says, what the challenges are, how is it that we have unidentified bodies, how does the body become unidentified, how should we be able to identify this? I mean, we've got technology now, we've got DNA, we've got all this. Anyway, first, before we do that, City is going to give you a proverb. City goes to an African country every week and brings us 5 proverbs from that week. So this week, this is the 4th proverb from the state of Libya.
Libya.
Okay.
Yes. Libya comprised of 3 regions. There was one called Tripolitania, Fezzan, and Cyrenaica.
Cyrenaica.
Yes.
Okay.
So Sisi.
So where is Benghazi? Is it in Fezzan?
I'm actually
Tripolitania. I can see Tripoli is in Tripolitania.
Yes, but
where is Benghazi?
I know it's within the country, but in which of these states it belongs to, I cannot tell you. Yes,
Okay.
but maybe someone else can look and tell us where it is that you will find Benghazi.
Sawa.
Walk with sandals until you get good shoes.
Walk with sandals until you get good shoes.
Yes.
Dr. Kalsi, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
Well, I would say it's similar to do not despise the time of small beginnings. I would also say that it shows us that we're getting to good shoes, or hopefully getting to accountable governance, means then that you can wear sandals. But I think since 1963, we have worn sandals for long.
I mean, we are due for shoes.
Yeah, I think so.
Surely.
It's due season.
We're due for our good shoes.
You know what your interpretation does? It tells us that we are accustomed to walking barefooted.
Yeah.
So when we have sandals, we think it's a big thing.
Yes.
And yet there are
We
shoes
think
that
that's
could...
what is the new shoe.
we are good. And yet there are shoes that could be worn. Okay. So...
Larry Kraft says, Kalsi, good to see you. You know who Larry Kraft is? Okay, well, they're just happy to see you.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Nice to hear from you.
Okay, what do you do for a living?
Well, I've done many things. But basically, I work as a forensic specialist. I worked in forensic death investigation operations. I've done that for Ministry of Health for 12 years. I then resigned from the Ministry of Health. In between, I've also done work for the International Committee of the Red Cross. I worked in forensic humanitarian actions where there's armed conflict or situations of violence, deaths from the migration crisis. I've done policy work for the International Development Law Organization in Somalia, helping to establish their forensic strategy and framework. Also done research in the forensic space, doing assessments to see what the state of forensic science in a country is. I've worked with the Argentine forensic anthropology team in some of their human rights investigations work in countries like Central African Republic.
So what's a forensic specialist? What's forensics?
So forensics is essentially an adjective. It comes from the word forum, where you are debating about an issue, and is essentially now applied to a scientific technique. You use a scientific method, you apply it to an investigation, and the outcome of that scientific analysis may then be produced in a courtroom.
And when it comes to death, what role does forensics play?
So forensics in death investigation, forensics helps us to establish the cause, the manner, and the mechanism of a death. Essentially, people will talk about the primary issue being cause of death. In the issue of unidentified bodies, and unclaimed bodies, unidentified persons cases, where the person is believed to be dead, then forensics is not just about the death investigation, but it's about the forensic human identification. So who is that person? Yeah.
So how do you identify a person? So let's say, okay, as you're getting closer into the topic of the day, the police pick up a body. They've been called by a community and told there's a body here. Then the police come and they pick a body, and then they take it to a mortuary. So how do you go about identifying who this person is?
Okay, well, maybe... Okay, when the police pick the body, they should not just pick the body. They should call the crime scene people, and then there should be an internal law enforcement procedure for how a body is removed from a scene where the death is questioned. So how do you then identify a body? Well, then either there is a hypothesis, like a presumption. We know who this person is, and this person lives here, and this person died here, so the community and the neighbors, they're like, or the relatives are like, yes, this is my mother, she was living alone in the village, huyu ni yeye. So there's a presumption that the identity of that person is known. There is the case where now a body may be picked up and nobody knows who that person is, or found in a location where people are like, this is a strange happening, and so we don't know who this person is. To move from where the body has been found to the identity of the person will depend on the state of the body. So is it a fresh, what we call fresh body? So you have your flesh and you just died, it's probably been a couple of hours. Or is the body decomposing already? Is the body, because decomposition is a natural process that the body will undergo, and the body starts to decompose, which means you start to lose visual characterization. So you lose the visual characteristics that a person would be used to when they see you in life. And so visual recognition is prone to error. And then once you have the body you have a body that's fresh, has a different has a different way to identify. And identification is not just one line of evidence. You say the face looks like the person. Governments are responsible for investigating crime through law enforcement, and so it's not sufficient to have one line of evidence. The international best practice is that you would have two lines of evidence. So even if I can see it's you, but I can take fingerprints and cross-check against the fingerprint database in the country if that's available and say, yes, we confirmed that this is so-and-so. So you move from fresh to decomposing. You can end up with fragmented remains, like from a plane crash, burnt beyond recognition, from a bus that caught fire. You can move to a fully skeletonized body. It's found somewhere in like migrants cross, the Libyan desert trying to get into Europe through the Mediterranean. And so you find now you have skeletonized remains all through the migratory path. And so if a body is skeletonized, is it wet skeletonized? Like, does it still have some tissue on it? Or is it dry skeletonization? So it will depend. Forensic human identification is a scientific process.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a deep one, like you've said. Are there laws that govern this process? For example, in this country called Kenya, right? What laws are in place, or regulations, or just procedures that have been documented that govern this?
So essentially, there are several laws governing death. So, for example, there are sections like Section 385 to 388 of the Criminal Procedure Code that talks about a magistrate's capacity to hold an inquest. There are Anatomy Act laws that a body can be given to an anatomy school for dissection. There are laws such as the Health Act that came about in 2017 that has like 2 articles on postmortem. Now there's the Coroner Service Act, but it's also now being amended.
Already,
even before implementation. Yes. Yeah. So there have been challenges with the deaths, with the management of deaths in the country, and the fragmentation of laws. The National Coroner Service Act came to sort of like consolidate the legislation on death management. And like, for example, what's a reportable death? Can a community come and say, look, this is our, religious belief, and so that supersedes an investigation. It came to consolidate the legislation, but there are several different pieces. Like any law dealing with fingerprints would impact the death legislation. I mean, so it's there are very many like even if you have the Borstal Institutions Act. What happens if a juvenile dies in a Borstal institution? What happens if a person dies in police custody or state custody? Let me put it that way. What about the issue of what do you call this? The Evidence Act, where it talks about that a person can only be declared missing essentially after 7 years. The fact that there is no the Convention on enforced disappearance is not a legal term. So who's an unclaimed body, and what's an unidentified body? So in my mind as a practitioner, that is unclaimed is okay. We know who it is, but nobody has come to claim. Okay, that when I think about my practice,
that's your interpretation.
That's my interpretation. Unidentified means we don't know the identity of this person.
But stop right there. How is it that you do not know the identity of the person and the body is there?
So, yes. So now there are 2 avenues of how forensic human identification is carried out. One, you have the side of a body without an identity, which is what we as forensic specialists would see in mortuaries or as part of our work. So we can have bodies without identities, and now we are in charge of establishing, using the body, the identity of that person, of that person, coming up with an identity, like a biological identity in a sense. Is it a human? Okay.
Number one.
Yes, like you can be brought for bones, and told, okay, hizi mifupa daktari ni za umbwa, ni za mnyama, ni za, so, ni ya binadamu, so you can, so we have to be able to say, yes, it's human, it's adult, or it's a child, these, and so that's on us.
All right.
But and is the sex female. So for example, I'll tell you, like women's pelvis, we do sexing of the skeleton through the pelvis and the skull. Men have, or the male species has a thicker skeleton and a larger cranium, and yes.
So they have big heads.
Men are thick-headed.
I think that's more it. Well, somewhere over here, with the eyebrows, it's really thick. But their pelvis is narrow. Women's and men more for locomoting, The women's pelvis is designed for childbirth. So a baby's head cannot fit in a male pelvis, but the female pelvis is designed, to accommodate the baby's head. So from the pelvis, we can tell the sex of the skeleton. Using population standards and research that's been carried out, and where it's not been carried out, but for stature. Like, what is the stature of the African skeleton?
What does stature mean here?
Here it would mean height.
Okay.
Yeah. What is that for a Caucasian? So biologically, we may have very offensive terms, right? So we go for Mongoloid. Like I would be seen as a Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and a Negroid. So the population standards, the research, has it been carried out for now you to say, okay, this one we are sure, because sometimes in the morgue, you will have morticians come tell you, or mortuary attendants say, daktari huyu ni Sudanese. You understand? Because the person is so tall and, their legs are, beyond the autopsy table. But we know that that's not true. Most Nilotic people are very, they are
lanky.
They are tall, yes. So, so this is how we determine these things.
To identification is starting from there, starting from human to come into sex, to come into likely race, to come into all those things. It's a process of identification.
Yes.
Up to a point where then you're able to tell, okay, so this is probably Eric.
Yes, like if you had a medical procedure, like let's say Eric has a prosthesis, on his left side, on the left leg, and in we are too, but and in the morgue we have a body that has a prosthesis.
Okay, prosthesis is who exactly?
Oh, sorry. It's a medical device, like let's say for the one that you have in case someone is amputated in the leg and they would need to have, I want to use the word fake leg, but yes, an artificial leg.
Artificial leg, yeah.
So that's what we use. We use the medical history, we use the dental history, we use we fingerprint the body, we will take pictures, we will do x-rays of the body. Actually, a full, what is called a low dose x-ray of a full body or a CT scan. That is the normal standard way on our end in mortuaries, on the death investigation side, where we have the body without identity. That's what we would do.
Okay. So all those things should be happening at the mortuary.
Yes, in any forensic any facility where forensic death investigation is occurring, at this level of international standard best practice, that should happen.
Okay, so ideally, what we are saying that if that unidentified body has been picked up from wherever it was picked up, crime scene, and the crime scene, whatever has happened on that end, when it comes to the morgue, then the next person that they should call is a forensic specialist, such as yourself.
Yes, they should.
So you come in here.
Yeah.
So let's even say that this body is still flesh. Which one comes first? Is it flesh or fresh?
Flesh fresh.
Flesh fresh. Okay? So it's a full body that has everything here.
Eric, say that again.
Flesh fresh.
Okay, good.
Akona meno, akona kila kitu. It's here. And it's not decomposing. It's not being decapitated. Full body is here. You should now be called in and now go through the motion of identifying who this person is and how they died, the cause of death.
Yes.
So how can we end up with unidentified bodies?
So now let's talk about the So we have, that's one component, bodies without identities inside the mortuary, undergoing a post-mortem process of forensic human identification and post-mortem of forensic death investigation process. On the other end, we have the police or the law enforcement officers who are supposed to undertake the criminal investigation side of things. That's another element of this multidisciplinary work. And then there's another side, which is not the side of how does a country deal with the families of missing persons? When you lodge a report of a person is missing, what is the next law enforcement action? Because in countries where I would say these are not blurred or not well understood, an anti-mortem unit is supposed to be within the law enforcement, because it is the state's responsibility to find out, to be able to account for its citizenry. So someone has to follow the investigation and contextual analysis of the disappearance of this person. And that's still an investigation.
What?
And when a state does not have that capacity or has not built that capacity, acknowledged or valued that capacity, then the problem now is you end up with civilians trying to fill that gap. And that's something I noted during, I noted when, when Missing Child Kenya came up. So someone a civilian has to now sit and say, look, last seen like at this time, dressed wearing these clothes, and honestly, I think that is tragic because all these three elements, even and I put the criminal investigation, but the reason I'm separating it is for simplicity of understanding. But there's the bodies without identities in the morgue, but there's identities without bodies. And so when you have identities without bodies, what is state action? So I think that's...
and all these things, there are laws that say there should be a correlation.
They should be.
Because the people have reported their kin missing.
Yes.
And police have reported finding a body.
Yes.
And morgues are holding a body. Then there should be a way in which we are cross-referencing and saying, let's rule out.
Yeah, that process is called the integration of the reconciliation of information.
Integration of the reconciliation.
Yes, of information. Post-mortem, which means after death, and ante-mortem, which means before death. Okay. So currently, the infrastructure for that is lacking. It only has happened in certain circumstances where we've had disaster. The disaster response towards this issue has been, I would say there's like a woye. I don't know. I'm trying to look for the English word.
That's a good English word.
Yeah. There's like a woye for, we have to do this, right?
Yeah, because we know that there are people who are missing here, the people who've died here, and we've got to identify them. Case in point, for example, the Asha school fire.
Yes.
We know that there are children whose parents are here.
Exactly.
And there were children in this dormitory, and we have bodies.
Yes.
So we go through that process of identification. That woye is not same standard. For example, it's not same standard being applied in Chakahola.
I had resigned by the time Chakahola happened. So I don't know, but I think...
So you can speak freely and say, from your observation.
I can. At least what I can say is that from the time I joined Ministry of Health in the Division of Forensic and Pathology Services, which was in June 2007, the infrastructure for this integrated multidisciplinary approach towards human identification had not been established. And so Chakahola would be the first largest skeletonized, I would say the largest forensic anthropology case. But because we don't have a forensic anthropologist in Kenya, yes, because pathologists examine flesh fresh. Forensic odontologists examine teeth, dentition, for changes, for age, for trauma. anthropologists examine skeletons. So it was essentially the largest case for forensic anthropology in our country. But I did not see any publicly available information of a forensic anthropologist or even a forensic anthropology team being allowed to come to Kenya or being requested to come to Kenya to handle that. So essentially, we kind of like place a burden on, the chief government pathologist and his team to stretch beyond their technical capacity. They do have the understanding of what is required. But you see, the other thing now I cannot speak for is whether these kind of requests were ever made and whether they were, they were provided or not.
So, Dr. we continue our conversation. Dr. Myrna Kalsi, who's our forensic specialist, who's our guest. Dr. we are seeing this number of cases of bodies in morgues. And the Nairobi City County government has said, all right, we have all these bodies. Our morgue is full. We have bodies that have not been claimed, and we have got to deal with them. How do we end up with so many unclaimed bodies in our mortuaries? It's not just that. Even KNH periodically keeps announcing that we are holding so many bodies, especially for KNH. They say many of them are children. We are holding so many bodies in our mortuary, and we have to dispose of them.
All right. Okay. So I think there are several reasons why bodies could become unclaimed. One, I think they could be this from my experience with even talking to families is first of all, essentially they could be fear, and also stigma, like someone's relative was found as the suicide bomber in a case. So that family is like, we are embarrassed, we don't know how this happened, are we to blame? So now you find that the family is stigmatized by the issue. You find sometimes like the state itself is like, no, if we allow the family to bury a body, they might make people might make a martyr out of this person. I've been asked about why Osama bin Laden was buried at sea. Also affordability. So people are like, the more the body stays in the morgue, we can't afford. We can't afford. And if the person now is found like 3-4 months later, and now a family comes to know, and the family lives in Bungoma, and they have to travel to Nairobi. Then now they're thinking about the transport costs. Now we have to also pay the mortuary costs, because now, since the identity is known, you have relatives, so someone has to pay this bill. So sometimes families might just say, then let the body be disposed of. And actually, maybe I should make that correction. I hear that kind of word being saying, bodies being disposed. It's actually what we should say is bodies being respectfully disposed, undergoing respectful disposition, because also morgue congestion is a real thing. So what has happened even in other places in the world, like in Sudan, just before the conflict began in mid-April last year, there were like already 3,000 bodies in the mortuary. Families did not want those bodies to be buried because they wanted an investigation of those bodies. But those bodies were in a mortuary, that could not properly preserve those bodies. So the bodies were essentially commingling and sludging, because now human tissue is sludging on top of one another when they're not buried in body bags. I mean, when they're not kept in body bags, so there's no barrier between that and the next body. And then also exposing it to scavenging. And then, looking at a potential health hazard. So a long-term burial can be short-term or long-term. The temperature underground is actually cooler. So if you collect all the preliminary data from a body, you do the investigation, the postmortem investigation, you can actually keep that body underground properly in what is called an organized mass grave. Those are terms that unfortunately we have had to develop as forensic practitioners globally, because in places like this armed conflict, what do you do? or there's like an earthquake, like let's say, hopefully that it never happens, but if anything happened in Kenya, the size, like a sizable event where we had even like 1,000 or 3,000 bodies or even more, then what would we do? Would we allow people to just bury a body wherever they found it? Then how do we account for who that person is?
So sometimes these burials are actually some form of storage as well.
Actually, they're just meant to be storage. And they're not meant to prevent any traceability. They're supposed to enhance traceability. So you should know where you buried the body, what number it was tagged, who that body belongs to in terms of the case report on the post-mortem forensic human identification death investigation side.
Right.
And then you allow families. So like, for example, even something simple like clothing and personal effects that were found on the body. What I found in my experience is these are just everything is just...
It's all lumped together.
It is not managed appropriately. So what should happen in the morgue is once all clothing and personal effects should be properly examined. And sometimes you may even have to wash the clothing to examine it properly. So that kind of like even a laundry service in a mortuary is not available. So what happens now is you find that you can't even dry those clothes. You can't even take pictures of them. You can't even put them in a catalog, so that when families come and we say, okay, let's go through first personal effects. What do you know? What was the person wearing? Or,
Yeah.
So I think all this, it plays a role into the lack of traceability. And so you have this unclaimed can be for various reasons. Even unidentified. But I would say, I mean, at this point is the other thing is I think we are very averse to research or paying money for research, or the cost of corruption is the fact that we don't have research to inform policy. Is that when was the last research done on death management systems in the country? And
when was the last time you heard of our universities focusing their attention on research?
I think
I'm talking about public
maybe I would be also guilty. It's just you go through university and you're like, you just want to finish this thing,
Very true.
You see, so I think that by the time you get to realize the value of research, you are so far gone in your career that now you're like, oh my gosh, now how do we do it? Someone has to fund it. Will someone actually be willing to fund it? And I think the problem with scientific fields, and I would say in this regard, forensic medicine, because this is the medicine of the postgraduate specialty that handles this work, is that it's not a priority. So I think this is a very African experience. What gets funded in Africa for science gets funded by institutions outside of the African continent. And so they fund what is in their interest, in their agenda. So they set priorities for research. So public health is huge. Okay, but where is forensic medicine in the scale of all this? It involves dead, missing, injured persons.
No money.
And yet the countries we speak of, part of the reason why they are where they are is because they focused on research. A lot of what they've done, the heights they have reached, whether it's in industry or commerce, research has been at the forefront. Whether it's medicine, whether it's you think of any discipline.
It's true.
Their focus and emphasis on research is one of the elements that help propel them to exactly where they are. And yet we who need it the most don't seem to understand that it's something that we ought to give attention to.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the tragedy of it. So if you look at even where I used to work, which was Ministry of Health, the focus was malaria, TB, HIV. So this government of this pathologist office, what do you people do anyway? You understand? In fact, I remember a previous DMS telling me one day, Doctor, even Jesus said, leave the dead to the dead.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, so the dead are not a cohort. So what are we doing in this ministry? But then you also can't be in interior, because this is the reason why police pathologists were no longer made a thing in Kenya, was because they couldn't be impartial. on the process of death investigation. And so the issue around forensic medicine, forensic science, it requires, science brings objectivity to the table and objectivity to the investigation. So that's why a forensic service, whether we like it or not, must be an independent service.
Okay. Is this what the National Coroners Act was doing?
Well, the National Coroners Act is, like I said, trying to consolidate legislation on deaths. The National Coroners Service Act cannot replace the need for a Forensic Services and Regulatory Act, which Kenya does not have. So there's so much about forensics. Like, for example, traffic medicine. How do you know someone is fit to drive beyond a certain age? You understand what I'm saying?
There's something called traffic medicine.
Yes, traffic medicine is forensic medicine. When a plane goes down, how do you identify the people, for example, who died in the plane crash in Ethiopia a few years ago? Majority of them were Kenyans. But what was the forensic human identification response? I remember really pushing hard to have myself and another colleague be part of Interpol's team. But when we came back, we were asked a very serious question and asked, are you people really supposed to be in this ministry?
What?
Yes. So I think I would say it's a lack of knowledge. And because we haven't, as a country, had the forensic conversation, we haven't opened the forensic conversation to become an inclusive conversation, we are really missing a lot of, for example, age assessment. How do you tell a child is 14? You know, how do you, when you say we have sent you for age assessment, what are you actually doing? You're actually asking for a scientific analysis of age. So we have not, when a migrant worker dies in Saudi Arabia, you know, what is the forensic medical response, death investigation response at our regional delegation in the Middle East?
Dr. Ari, I want to take you back to something you said. It triggered a thought in my mind. When you look at the focus we have as far as the various disciplines within medicine is concerned, is it really ignorance, or is it the aspects, the various disciplines that promise someone a bigger earning at the end of it? Let me explain to you why I'm asking the question. If you look at even when you studied that Department of Public Health, for many people who study the discipline that you're in, it wasn't taken too seriously.
No.
And yes, exactly, because it wasn't emphasized. But yet, a country like ours actually requires a very serious focus on that, because then we focus on preventative and promotive health, which we don't. We talk about it, okay? Now, if you're talking about the dead and you look at the taboos and the myths and misconceptions that we have around death, when you're a doctor who deals with the death, is it that what you have studied is not relevant, or they don't understand the relevance, or on the scale of what they think priorities ought to be? There was a time when professors and dons felt that women should not study anything postgraduate apart from pediatrics. And they would say so.
Yeah.
Those biases exist.
They do.
And why I'm saying you're right is that there's a misinformation, and that bias, is it really ignorance, or is it just blatant, what word can I use which is polite? Nothing comes to mind, so I'll just
use the
word. I'll just leave it, yes.
Okay, well, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot to be discussed. I think a lot of, first of all, forensic medicine is not something that you would see, you know, people saying go into forensic medicine. Because people are like, in fact, for an intern to be told go do a postmortem, you know, first of all, is way outside their bracket. Because undergrad cannot teach you how to do should not, let me put it this way, teach you how to do a postmortem. That is the work of a pathologist who has done a master's in forensic medicine. So there's a lot that needs to be, for example, how many masters in forensic medicine do we have in the country?
How many?
Not many. There are very few. In contrast to the size of our population.
By very few, what do you mean? 100?
It's no. Pathologists, yes. Forensic pathologists, probably less than 10.
Less than 10.
Yeah, less than 10.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to say I think that this issue of forensic medicine being not acknowledged, not valued, not acknowledged, not budgeted for within the governance framework is what has caused a lot of institutions to be to be crippled. Sorry. You cannot run a National Commission of Human Rights without understanding forensic medicine or forensic sciences or evidence management. You really need to be able to know that very well. You can have an investigation component, but the reality is you can't be oblivious of the field. You can't do it in the, evidence management is critical for a strong criminal justice system. It's very important for anything. If you talk about sexual and gender-based violence, maritime, financial crimes, you talk about, drugs and crime, you talk about homicides, femicide. I mean, the list is endless. It's all forensic medicine. But that's why the problem is the law has been so fragmented because of lack of knowledge. And now because of turf wars, you can't. Globally, there's a forensic advisory board. There are forensic advisory boards, but Kenya, we don't even have a forensic advisory board, unfortunately. And
is there anything that you're doing, you and your fellow forensic scientists, a few of you that you are, to work to talk in the corridors, to go into offices, go into forums and talk about this, create that awareness? Because of what I'm hearing from you is much of what we are seeing is just lack of awareness and therefore lack of placing importance. When a director of medical services is asking you, so you just let mambo of death be death, this is just lack of awareness.
It is lack of awareness. I think for a long time it's been lack of awareness. I think now we have crossed a certain line where things could become very convenient for not having systems.
I see.
Yeah, and I think when the line between how perpetration of crimes is handled, how investigation of crimes is handled, how scientific analysis of evidence is handled, how adjudication of that evidence is handled in the courts. When the lines between those aspects starts becoming blurry, they can be blurry because of lack of knowledge. They could have been blurry because of lack of knowledge, ignorance, refusal to put money in the right places, corruption. But I think when now it starts to move to where it's now working conveniently to create missing persons, where now you have a problem. Now you have a problem. Because it means the governance framework is skewed or is deliberately dilute, to get away with crime. So I think that is huge. So I would say the unidentified person, unclaimed persons, biggest ethical issues is we are creating missing persons. And then we also have a big problem of if you misidentify one person, you've misidentified two people.
Yeah.
So you need to study this thing very well. It's like having, the red Skittles, and the green Skittles and the brown Skittles and the blue Skittles and the purple ones, and everything is just commingled. You actually need to do research to develop a proper forensic ecosystem to address crimes and human rights violations in a country. And I would say what we are doing, I talk about this as much of a chance I get, I talk about it. I would say the lack of knowledge has even been not just in terms of where I worked in terms of government or interagency action, but the lack of knowledge was also there because I would say I guess even if I was a PS or a minister, my diary does not include talking to Daktari who has an issue on, a cardiologist doctor wants to do a presentation to me, or a forensic medicine person. But I think there must be a way to acknowledge all fields of medicine and the value that they bring. But I think the lack of knowledge has also been outside of government. And I think today now we find ourselves at a point where people inside of government and outside of government are also asking these very serious questions, and there must be answers to these questions.
In this field, must someone necessarily be a medical doctor to be able to participate in forensic science?
No. Forensic science is for scientists, and science makes doctors. So I think we need to, so forensic science is
natural science makes for doctors.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the field is wide, and I think the core is the science.
Okay. Dr. we thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for this conversation. Dr. Myrna Kalsi is a forensic specialist. She's been our guest for this hour, getting to understand what forensics is and the role that it plays.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.